KoitCast.
Today's guest is an internationally recognised scientist in his field and served as a professor at the State University of New York for over 30 years. He graduated with a BA and MA from the City University of New York and with a Ph.D. in Neuro-Sensory Science from The Ohio State University. He's written many scientific articles and authored 4 books pertaining to the paranormal. Please give a massive Koit welcome to Bob Davis. Hi Bob, welcome to KoitCast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Paul. Thank you.
No worries, you've been highly recommended to me, so thank you ever so much for coming. Shall we start with, in your own words, who are you, where are you from, all that good stuff?
Actually, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. Usually that generates varied responses. You tend to think of crime, but back in the 60s and 70s, things did turn for the worse. But I enjoyed my childhood in the Bronx very much, and then I eventually pursued doctoral studies in the neurosciences, and that led to an academic and professional career as a professor and researcher for over 4 decades. And it shaped me in a particular way of viewing the world, which was at the time, essentially materialistic. Uh, and the scientific method was the only way to prove a theory. But based on my experiences, my attitude has changed considerably since retiring.
Excellent. Can we go into your work career a bit, and just because I like to understand the grounding of where people come from and then how they've changed over time. So would that be possible, just to enhance a bit about your work?
About my research,
Yeah, yeah,
my experiences.
yeah. Everything relating to work. What did you do?
Yeah,
What was
I,
your main
I was
path?
sure. I was essentially a neurosensory researcher, and we would measure electrophysiological activity from the brain,
Ah, nice.
and and we try to note changes that are occurring, indicating damage to different parts of the brain, and comparing that with the analysis of the tissue, and all in response to noxious external stimuli like excessive noise or
Mm.
ototoxic drugs, industrial solvents and chemicals. So we were awarded grants from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to develop criteria to, in a sense, tell people, that this is toxic. This can destroy certain parts of your brain. Don't inhale this. Don't expose yourself to this or that. So that's essentially it. And I taught courses around that subject material, focusing primarily in the research area.
So you're primarily responsible for those warning labels on products like "Don't drink this," "Don't eat this," "Don't spray it in your face."
That's a fair analogy. Yeah.
Good on you. Good on you. You've saved many probably people down the line, haven't you, from their own stupidity, probably. Amazing. So when did the paranormal then come knocking on your door? What was your introduction?
Well, the initial change, it happened, it was in March of 2014. I had retired in 15, but in 14, while my wife and I were hiking one evening in Sedona, Arizona, beautiful Red Rock country, known for its paranormal activity and experiences that people relate. While we were walking one dark early evening, uh, I noticed an amber circular orb that was remaining stationary, and it was about 500 feet above and a few hundred yards away from us. And it obviously appeared peculiar because it lacked propulsion. It didn't have wings. It didn't generate sound.
Mm.
Well, this was one orb. All of a sudden, I see another second one emerge either from within it or from behind it. It was really impossible to tell. So, of course, I'm started to think of the normal geological, atmospheric, plasma,
Mm.
possibly based explanations. Um, and they remained stationary for several minutes, more than capturing my attention, and they suddenly winked out. But Paul, I've always been interested in UFOs ever since I was a kid. Growing up in the 60s in the space race with the Soviet Union at the time, it was hard not to be enamored by space and UFOs, which got headlines back then, and they are today too, of course, with the disclosure movement. But it left such a strong impression in me, Paul, that I wrote my first book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe, in 2015. And then I had another extraordinary experience about 2 years later when I woke one very cold morning. It was about 6:30 a.m. And I had such a realistic, horrific, lucid dream of suffocating to death. It was a hyper real experience, and it left me with a strong sense of knowingness that Anne, a very close and dear friend and colleague who worked with me on my research in the laboratory for over 20 years, had died. I just had that strong feeling combined with the horrific sensation of dying, which I've never had before. So I drove to work that morning with the I guess you can call it a strong emotional impact of that lingering dream, lucid dream, considering that it, didn't mean anything other than a random, um, scary glitch of some type that can occur in the brain. When I arrived at the lab, and opened the door with my key, I I noticed the tear-soaked faces of my colleagues, and it validated me right then and there that Anne had passed, and she did that morning. At that time, that I had that what we shall call a shared death or empathic death experience, and it's not that uncommon. And we were always talked about spirituality. I can see her purposely doing this, informing me of her passing, and, validating in my mind that there is a life after life. There's a
Mm.
continuation of consciousness after bodily death. And, I reconstruct the incidents of that. It was an extraordinarily uncomfortable event, but it was apparent that I've never had such a nightmare, never such a realistic, hyper real event such as that, and combined with the fact that I had a dream that my colleague died when she did. You combine those two events, timing and meaning. You talk about a synchronicity. These two things coming together, what are the chances? They're
Mm.
astronomical. So it was very convincing to me, and it compelled me to write a second book, Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence in 2017. I would not have written it unless I had that shared death experience. And then
That
I had,
Before
hmm?
we go into the next one, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind, about that last
Of
experience
course.
you just spoke about. Um, was that dream scenario, that lucid dream event, was it sent to you by her, or were you reaching out to it? Have you
No,
thought about that?
she sent, good question, Paul. She sent it to me. I did not have any intention in that area. It was just a strong knowingness that came about me, which wasn't from within myself. So that's why I believe it was from her.
Hmm. This knowing is a continual thread across my podcast episodes because it's something that really intrigues me. You have no data per se, and then all of a sudden you know something to be 100% true without anything. It's very strange, but all encompassing. I know it myself.
Yes, yes,
It's a
yeah.
strange thing. And when you
People
went
have
into
to
the
go
office,
through it.
right? Presumably, as soon as you opened those doors and you saw everyone crying, that compounded the knowing. No one had said to you, "Well, by the way, Anna's died." At that point, you just
No, I
it's a
knew.
knowing.
Uh,
Yeah.
Exactly, Paul. It was that unusual to see the sadness on their faces. I was convinced at the time. even before they told me.
Mm.
Yeah, indeed.
Had you kept that to yourself since, or with those colleagues, or did you say, "Oh, I had this dream"?
I shared it with two colleagues. One of them very materialistic, and didn't believe that it happened really. Just listened to it, thought it was interesting, and we go about our daily business.
Mm.
But my other colleague is a strong believer in such experiences, and we continue to discuss today these experiences and my work on my book and film, which we can talk about,
Yeah.
uh, which these kinds of experiences led towards. You could see they led towards me writing books. I had to express it. I had to learn more about it, and selfishly, it forced me into literature to learn what happened, why me, what does it mean. What does this mean? Is there life after death? The ultimate question of our existence. And here I'm having an experience that is confirming to me. I can't see how any more realistic an experience can be unless you see a ghost of a deceased relative.
Mm.
Is convincing indeed, and people do claim that. But this was indeed convincing alone, let alone. And people have to have these kinds of experiences, and millions have. We're not talking about unusual events. These extraordinary human experiences, they run from near death to out of body experiences. Hundreds of thousands of people in the United States alone have a near death experience. 200,000 people. 320 people worldwide, million people worldwide have had a near-death experience. And these paranormal events are really normal. Extrasensory perception is valid. Non-locality, in other words, is valid. In Kundalini awakenings, that was my third experience. These energetic spiritual awakenings are valid. And that led me to write, having a Kundalini awakening led me to write my third book, which we can
We'll
discuss
definitely get
when
into,
you're
yeah.
ready.
Um, Obviously, knowing that you had a background in neuroscience and you're studying things that are basically true or not true, what binary ones and zeros, etc., all the mathematical side of things. How did your brain cope with this new paradigm or this new world at that point, or would you already sort of like thought it's there?
I appreciate that question because I I fight that a lot because I'm moving from not a strict materialist, meaning the brain equals consciousness. There is no God. Yeah, when you die, it's dust to dust and ashes to ashes. I did have somewhat of an open mind as far as UAPs are concerned, but I never addressed the topic of consciousness and spirituality the way that I have had as a result of my experience. I transformed from a rather egoic individual who strive for recognition among scientists in his or her field. I tried to move up the ladder from assistant to full professor, which I did, but it was publish or perish for much of my life and giving lectures. So there was a sense of ego there. Once I had started having these experiences, however, I became more fluid. I became, and I'm not kidding when I say I became a tree hugger. A tree hugger. I literally, after my experiences, went out into the woods, into nature, and began to hug trees. And I felt a greater sense of connectivity with our environment and became more sensitive with the ecology of our planet. I'm still materialistic, but less so.
Mm.
I'm less selfish. I'm more empathic and sympathetic to people. I know that I am as a result of my experiences, not intentionally, but when people have, I think, Paul, an extraordinary event, whatever it is, an awe-inspiring event, along the lines we're talking about, near
Hmm.
death, body, etc., you have an associated ego dissolution. If for some reason you're not the center of the universe anymore. Relative, to where you were before the event. You become less self-centered and more loving, more humane in the process. And I like to think that I am more humane in the process. Still with my faults, still have a long way to go. We all strive to improve ourselves, and that's a beautiful ideal. And we should all continue to do that. It's almost impossible to do when we're held hostage to our brain and
Mm.
our ego-driven, logical left brain.
So
It
it's a
might
proper transformative experience for you, profound experience. Getting back to the scientist side of things, and this has been my final question on this part, what percentage of scientists in the fields, whatever fields, you can just use yours as an example. How many of those would be open to the topics we're talking about today versus no, only science exists? What would you say that is?
I'm not aware of any formal surveys in that area. However, I'm certain the percent is increasing, has increased over the last 10, 20 years, especially with the positive findings that we're seeing in extrasensory perception, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, all which are considered valid by the scientific and medical communities. The problem is we don't have sufficient funding, public funding from National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, and public funding is really the only way researchers in academia are getting money to pursue research in these areas. But research still goes on in medical science and near-death experiences in terms of what is it? Does it really represent an afterlife as people claim it does, for instance? Extrasensory perception, as I mentioned, is valid. It's a very subtle, small effect, but many universities, Paul, many universities have faculty that are conducting research in consciousness studies, extrasensory perception, and other extraordinary human experiences along the lines we're discussing. And there are actually over 200 of them. We're just naming some of the more common ones, even interactions with unidentified aerial phenomena, as many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide they claim to have with non-human intelligence as well as structured craft. They have for decades, they have for eons. That's another type of ontological shock that people have in response to extraordinary human events. And after these ontological shocks, it's hard not to change.
Mm.
Uh, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, and it changes people in different ways based on that person's personality. It's all relative, we're all individuals, but we are different. There are after effects, and that has been very well documented in these areas that I'm talking about. Awakenings, near death, out of body, clear transformative behavioral effects that occur along the lines that I shared with you. People do become, in the long run, more humane. And people can indeed have a negative reaction, a negative near-death experience, a negative lucid dream, a negative spiritual awakening, but it's in the minority. About 10 to 20% of the time, it can be a highly hellish negative experience. But for the most part, in the long run, the vast majority consider it to be a very positive, rewarding experience that transform them positively over time once they integrate the experience. And when we get to my Kundalini awakening, I had a spiritual emergency following that because these events can provoke a great deal of anxiety. How can they not? When something awe-inspiring suddenly occurs to you that causes you to disbelieve things that you believed your whole life. It changes your sense of who and what you are to a large extent. Even people have near-death experiences. 70% of them have a divorce after 7 years Why? Because the person who had the near-death experience was so greatly transformed by it that their partner, their spouse, whatever, well, they couldn't interrelate in the same positive way that they did prior to the NDE.
Hmm.
Uh, so these experiences can create problems with interrelationships. There's no question about it. But they could also be very beneficial. And we need more research in these areas and the need for a paradigm shift where we can research these areas much more thoroughly and integrate both the subjective personal experience and the physical laws that exist that also occur when these experiences happen. But we have to better understand that, what people go through, what they are experiencing in every way, shape, and form when they have these awe-inspiring events. And there are some studies that have been done trying to capture the semantic and the thematic um, personal experience that people have and trying to make sense of it from that angle in order to better understand the nature of what's governing these human experiences that are awe-inspiring.
Now, your change from the an event, I'll call it that, your visitation via lucid dreaming. Do you think, having looked back on it, presumably you will have done, did you need that experience at that point?
My lucid dream,
Yeah, the one where obviously you knew Anne had passed away. Did you need it at that point?
I think I needed it. I think I think in some ways our destiny is planned, and I needed it to write a book, which led to eventually another experience. Um, I often do this to my wife as if I'm being
Oh,
manipulated,
puppeted, yeah. Hmm.
like a puppeteer. I feel like these events purposely happened to me because I was always inquisitive and open-minded, and And I think they're more natural and normal to have than not have over one's lifetime. If you ask, for instance, Paul, let's say you have 100 people in the audience and you ask for a show of hands, you ask the question, who here has had an anomalous paranormal-like experience? You know how many hands are going to raise? Many. Many, if they're being honest,
Hmm.
many hands will raise. What is it? Uh, uh, 10 to 15% of people alive today believe they've had an out-of-body experience. 5 to 8% of the world population has had a near-death experience. We're talking about, again, like I mentioned earlier, millions of people who have these experiences, and I needed it. Did they need it? Well, again, it can be hellish, but it can also certainly be beneficial, and we do need it to evolve spiritually. And I think we need it in order to achieve that goal. I think we're here for a purpose, not only to make money, have a family, provide for them, express and share love, certainly, but also to become more spiritual, more humane, at one with society and humanity, more so over time as we grow. So we do need it, I think, to evolve spiritually.
I
And
agree
I
with you.
I needed it to evolve spiritually. I certainly did, Paul.
And your third then experience, your Kundalini awakening, as you called it, can you go into that now?
Yeah, this was the home run of experiences. My last, probably, well, I shouldn't say it was my last extraordinary human experience. So I'm sure I'm going to have another one before it's dust and ashes to ashes. But I gave a paper in Byron Bay, Australia. Uh, I gave lectures at conferences on life after death and unidentified aerial phenomena and consciousness. And after I gave these talks, I was invited to what this one person, Dr. Marie Batchelor is her name. She was an OBGYN physician at the time. She invited me and other people to her room at a hotel to have some wine and cheese and relax. I had nothing to do at the time, so I accompanied, about 8, 10 of the people. And she said about an hour in, let's do some healing. So we all sat in a circle. Many people seemed to know what was coming. She suddenly talked about timelines and DNA. She spoke of time and space, the greater good, cleaning and healing different parts of the body. She talked about negative and positive entities, past lives, emotional traumas, and also mentioning organs of the body. And she was a physician, so of course she was into anatomy and physiology. Let's clean the engrams, she would say, of the stomach, the pancreas, the lungs. I started coughing, Paul, and I couldn't stop. There's like an energetic energy took control of my body and my mind, and it facilitated a very strong physical and really a strong psychological effect on me, a sense of dualism. I started coughing and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. And I knew consciously that I must be a nuisance to other people in the room, but I couldn't stop. It was regardless of the fact. Manners didn't count. It was that strong an urge, in other words, that cough reflex is off, as if I was getting rid of negative energy from my body. That's the way I sensed it. Well,
Okay.
that event, Paul, was so surreal but real and strong to me that I asked her to meet me the next day in my room in the hotel for a one-on-one session. I wanted to see what would happen if she did it again, what my reaction would be. Uh, as soon as she started talking, I had this again energetic energy that took control of my body and my mind, and it facilitated physical and psychological events so that I had this strong sense of dualism. I perceived a separation between my body and my mind in space and time, and it led to this overwhelming, ineffable, self-transcendent experience that was energetically confusing, but blissful. It felt wonderful. Yet, Paul, if you looked at my body while I was going through this energetic awakening, it looks like I was being tortured. It looks like I'm crying, and I can't simulate it now, but my head was turned to the extreme side and my facial muscles deviated as extremely as possible to one side, only limited by the tissue itself. I looked like Reagan in the movie The Exorcist, if you ever saw that, and,
Hmm.
minus the green pea soup.
That's right.
But it looked like I was suffering. It truly did. And I have the video. I handed her my phone and I told her to videotape what was going on. And she did. I have 7 minutes of it. And for years, Paul, I did other many podcast interviews. I never would admit of my Kundalini awakening, that experience. I was embarrassed by it. And I've never really shown it, although I did share it with several people, but I never showed it publicly. But if you could use your imagination, it just looked like I was sobbing and my head was down, bobbing up and down, and my breathing was irregular. My breath was held, very irregular breathing, breath rate. And I'm sure there were other physiologic features that were distorted and altered. All the while, I felt blissful, beautiful energy. And I kept saying to her, is that all you got? Give me more. I waited, give me more, give me more. And she laughed, and she did. I didn't want it to end. And when it did end, we smelled sulfur. The smell of sulfur was in the environment, and it was strong. And she suddenly took out tobacco and she lit it. uh, tobacco that was wrapped. It was almost like a marijuana joint, it looked like, but it was filled with tobacco, purposely brought because she expected it, like negative entities that smell like sulfur in her mind, at least, were released. And it was clear, it smelled like rotten eggs indeed. And it was remarkable. Once she did light the fuse, and the smoke was emitted, that it masked the smell, and the smell dissipated. But that almost was like a confirming after event of something that made me a tree hugger. And that led to my third book, Unseen Forces: The Integration of Science, Reality, and You, which I wrote in 2019. Uh, and curiously, while writing that book, I had a strong sense that it would turn into a documentary. And in fact, it did. I just finished a documentary which can be seen on Amazon, uh, on Amazon Video, or consciousness.media. People can go to consciousness.media, or Amazon Video to see the movie. It's called The Consciousness Connection. And my new book is also named The Consciousness Connection: Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality. And that was just released along with the film. So I would not have written that last book, or the third book, Unseen Forces, let alone The Consciousness Connection, let alone doing the film, unless I had that Kundalini experience. I didn't know what it was, Paul, until after the fact. I had to read about it to find out that what I experienced was called a Kundalini awakening. And to many people in your audience, many know what it is. Many, I'm sure, do not. And I encourage them to read about Kundalini awakening and know that, at least in my mind, unequivocally, it is a valid experience, and millions of people have experienced it. And been studies done with scientists, 40 of them in one study, who had a Kundalini awakening, and as a result of that, changed their career path. That's how transformative that Kundalini awakening can be. They change their career path to one in which serves humanity, much more so than what they initially did. And it changed them in dramatic ways thereafter, again, making them more humane in the process than they were relative to prior to the experience. But it led to me writing. I had to express it. I wrote my whole life, and that's me. That's my manner of expression, writing. So it came out in the form of the books, Unseen Forces and The Conscious Connection. And then I had to interview over 20 scholars, many of whom were my friends who were included in the film. They agreed to participate in the interviews for the film, The Conscious Connection, because they knew me. And over 20 scholars were interviewed, which resulted in our traveling to places like Stanford University in California, University of Virginia, the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Nevada, California, and the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia. And these are American locations.
Hmm.
The audience may not be familiar with them, and other places too, as well as individual interviews, resulting in that documentary film on Amazon Video.
Well, I'll have it linked up in the description to this video anyway, so go and check that out. Definitely do that, and I will also be doing the same thing because I have not seen it, so I will go and have a look at that. I've got Amazon. Um, I'm highly interested. As I alluded to earlier, about the path nudge. I call it the nudge, which is what these Kundalini experiences are, where people change careers. That's why I asked you the question at the beginning: what was your career path? Because I always like to think, where have people been pushed from and to, and did they need that career as a step along the way to get to where they are now? So that was the first thing. The second thing was obviously the sulfur element. Straight up said to me, demonic possession, because that's the first thing your mind goes to with the sulfur thing. Do you think you had an attachment that needed to be gotten shot of?
That's an exceptional question because I question that every day from that moment forward. Was it a demonic experience or not? I did ask people who I thought were in the know, who said it was a positive experience. Smelling that sulfur, I tried to research it. I did come across the fact that it is commonly seen after, excuse me, it's commonly smelled after spiritual awakenings, which relieved me, thinking that that smell, yes, it
Mm,
automatically creates the feeling that it was a demonic event. But I wasn't convinced because it was such a energetic and in a way self-violating experience. I didn't ask for it, and it came about spontaneously without without preparation. And but yet it felt so good to me. I That's what made me feel like it wasn't demonic. That sulfur smell must not be related to well, it could be related as I think about more, but it could have been a negative attachment that was released and had that odor. Maybe. I can't be certain. All I'm certain was that that experience was real
yeah. Or it
and
could
for
be
me,
just that that was a residual smell of a spiritual experience. I don't know whether it's confined only
right.
to negative versus what we, deem positive. Who knows? Research would be needed to be
That's
taking
right.
place on it, wouldn't it? The duality you mentioned, were you, when you were doing this face to the side business, did you see yourself at that time from above, i.e., were you bilocated, or did you just feel it within yourself?
I wasn't bilocated. I felt it within myself. I was, it was an internal event, but the distinction between mind and body was so pronounced. And again, it's ineffable. People have to experience to understand it. It was so pronounced that I was certain that I was not my body, and I was a distinct entity, independent of my body, but certainly dependent on my body, my brain, for obvious, physical sensory reasons. But that sense of duality became so apparent to me, Paul, from that experience that all I can say was that I could not have been proven more significantly of duality than that experience. It wasn't a bilocation. It wasn't an out-of-body experience, as millions contend, where they view their body from a different vantage point. I didn't have that. It was indeed a knowingness and a firm validation of an independence between mind and body.
Mm.
Clearly, that event gave me that impression
Did
and
it give
belief.
you an impression of symbiosis, i.e., there's two separate entities, or is it just one in two places?
Two separate entities, one mind, one body. Yes, a good way to put it.
Because I've always pondered this idea, right, which is that the spiritual component, the soul, we'll call it, we are invading entities, whatever, and that there's a human here, perhaps with its own mind, I don't know, and that the souls come in and take over that. It's just a thought I've pondered a lot along the years. I'm not saying it's true or not. Is that possible?
Well, I think it is possible. Again, it can't be proven. I'm still I still have that scientific method in the back of my mind. So I say, I have these ideas. That's a good question.
Mm.
I think that myself, but in order to be sure, we need to obviously study it further. But when you have these kinds of experiences, you're more inclined to believe that we may very well be susceptible to negative attachments. And people who are mediums, and I mean true mediums, not the psychic on the street corner who read your palm for, $5, that kind of thing. There are legitimate, well-established mediums who have drop-ins. They're taking over. by another entity, and they assume a different voice, a different personality, a different writing style, a different speaking style. And there are clear, well-documented cases where a medium like Leona Piper a century ago was can forecast one's, make predictions about someone or talk about one's deceased relatives with such tremendous accuracy that the person who is being read by her is blown away by the accuracy of those events. In fact, there is a institution called the Winbridge Institute in the United States where they have trained mediums and they have performed experiments where they show over 80% accuracy in terms of their ability to predict information about a person that they do not know beforehand. So mediumship is real. The point is, for a long story short, there could be these drop-ins or these negative attachments as well as positive ones that can occur, and we see this to some extent in the field of mediumship, which is why I brought that up. But I can't be certain that it applied in my case, but she did talk about that in her instructions, removing the engrams and the negative attachments, which led me to my excessive coughing, which led me to my energetic awakening. So maybe she was, in a sense, directly communicating through intention. And there's a term called deshpa. I'm probably mispronouncing it. Deshpa. It's pronounced something like that, which means through intention alone, or sometimes through just by being touched by a shaman or guru master who has the power of inducing a Kundalini awakening. And some people can through various ways. And sometimes it happens spontaneously. People during childbirth have it. People coming close to death have these kinds of experiences. Many events can induce it, not only by a master. Practicing meditation and yoga can induce it. Kundalini yoga is a means by which people practice it in order to achieve that state of nirvana or Brahman, as it's called
Mm.
in Hinduism, or Nirvana in Buddhism. In Christianity, I guess you'd refer to it as God consciousness, but whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. It's an enhanced consciousness. People become more humane. Call it what you will. It is culturally the same, and people who have it relate to it. I talked to, in other words, a person who's had a Kundalini awakening, and it was the most amazing discussion, Paul, because you're seeing yourself in another person's eyes. And it's a remarkable experience having that kind of experience and then talking to somebody who's sharing the same things that you went through. But you don't, I used to, after the experience, Paul, my Kundalini awakening, I would meditate. I've meditated my whole life, and I encourage people to do that for a variety of reasons. I used to hear while meditating very faint heavenly music. And I can't describe it other than the most beautiful spiritual like heavenly music that you can imagine. That's the only thing I can say. What one's imagination does with that, it's hard to say. Other people have expressed that, hearing music, following it. You also have kriyas, or while meditating or while the body's at rest, you start shaking. Your limbs would start shaking, which was actually a positive feeling, Paul. It was almost like a validation of the experience. I don't have it anymore. But for about a year afterwards, along with the anxiety, I would hear that music and I would have those kriyas and I would get uh, muscle twitches every time I talk about spirituality. My mouth muscle, if I may do this, would vibrate, by itself automatically every time I talk about spirituality or consciousness with another person. Don't ask me why, but it would bring me to a different level, almost as if it was activating something within.
It reminds me of the brain tingles thing, which hopefully you've heard of. Um, I've told this story before on here, but I'm going to say it again anyway. Years ago, right, when I was younger and mates of mine played with my Star Wars figures. Yeah, I'm that old. We had the Kenner Star Wars figures. When somebody was playing with my figures, I would feel brain tingles up here, like it was sparkling feeling, like, oh, someone's touching something that belongs to me, which is, and it sounds weird, but I had that thing. That reminds me of your lip thing and other things, and then makes me think of your limb scenario. Does that is that limb scenario where you're like shaking and that? Do you think that's us in some way consciously disconnecting from the body? Therefore, it's like causing this thing, and that's the same for my brain tingles. I'm slightly out of myself, and
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. It's a very reasonable question because it brings up in my mind, it's an autonomic nervous system response. My
mm,
body obviously was doing one thing. My brain is obviously active. I'm not dead. So my brain was in hyperdrive. It was behaving in a chaotic way, in a way that was resulting in the kinds of physical mannerisms that was so peculiar. Yet consciously, I was aware in a distinctive way of what my body was doing. But it bring your question raises not only that, but the concept of uh, what's called interbrain synchronization. When we're close to somebody, when we share something close emotionally, like love, romance, something very personal with another individual who you are empathically bonded with. Studies have shown that your brains actually synchronize and you become one. It's like two people sharing the same body because the brains are so similar. And we call that phase differences of synchronization. So we see that in 9/11, where millions of people's attention were brought to that one event, and random number generators were suddenly changed to become non-random. There's a lot to that story, but studies have shown that the collective attention of people like the 9/11 and other world events can actually alter the physical systems
mm,
based on consciousness alone. But your question brings up that and also biophotons, light energy that's generated by the cells and DNA of the body. This is proven. Light energy, photonic emissions, ultra weak light energy, microvolts, and they can be conveyed with what's referred to as a torsion wave, like a conveyor belt, where your tingling can evoke mental effects by the touch of another person.
mm,
And energy healing, in other words, can be promoted or facilitated by biophotonic energy. And it could very well be, and there are physicists who are studying this now, biophotons generated from the body, proving, in other words, we are really light beings. We say that kind of in a woo-woo way, we're light energy, we're light beings, but it's true. We do generate light. The brain itself generates light energy, and evidence of extrasensory perception may manifest, may be conveyed as a result of biophotonic emissions. It is something that is being studied much more extensively now. It is still certainly theoretical, but it might explain much of what you're asking and my experiences. It might be behind, what consciousness may be, and might provide a means to explain how consciousness can leave the body in almost like a conveyor-like manner and and go elsewhere as people contend during a near-death experience.
Which brings us lovely on to your book, The Consciousness Connection. Um, you mentioned in the subtitle that there are extraordinary human experiences, or EHEs. Now, obviously, we've mentioned a few of these already, and you said, I think you said there's something like 200 of them. Could you give me some examples of other ones, if you don't mind?
Well, again, as I mentioned, the near-death and out-of-body experiences, extrasensory perception, Kundalini awakenings. I think altered states of consciousness induced by many different things. One like psychedelic drugs, for instance. We see in autistic children evidence of extrasensory perception as well. Just observing rainbows and beautiful animals, waterfalls, the Rocky Mountains, the wonders of nature can evoke these extraordinary experiences in people, sometimes facilitating an awakening. But they can be hellish as well. Near death experiences are, of course, hellish. You're in the process of dying. 20%, however, people who have a heart attack, cardiac arrests, experience a near death. Not everybody does, however. You have to be close to death, of course. The person
Hmm.
doesn't die, it's obviously near death. That's just, just some of the main ones.
Um, can you give me some of what you would class as your favorite anecdotes or stories from this consciousness book? The ones that probably stand out to you the most.
Um, the one that stands out to me most is the story told to me by Bruce Grayson.
All right.
He's a noted near-death experiencer, researcher, and psychiatrist, and I know Bruce, and I interviewed him at a conference in Washington D.C. For the International Near-Death Studies uh, program, and one of the stories he told us, and I'm going to try to recall it as best as I can. Please follow along.
Sure.
One of the people he interviewed at the time of the person's near-death experience was an engineer in South Africa, and he was hospitalized with severe pneumonia and had to be resuscitated. And his primary nurse, who worked with him every day, was named Anita. And one day she told him that she was going to take a long weekend off and that there'd be other nurses substituting for her. So while she was gone, he had another respiratory event and a near-death experience and found himself in a beautiful pastoral scene. And to his amazement, he saw his nurse, Anita, during his near-death experience. And she came walking towards him and he takes a double take and says, Anita, what are you doing here? And she said, Jack, you need to go back. I want you to go and find my parents and tell them I love them very much and I'm sorry I wrecked the red MGB. The red MGB. Now, this was back in the 70s in South Africa, and there weren't a lot of red MGBs there.
Hmm.
So when Jack awoke in the hospital, he told the first nurse what he saw about this near-death experience about Anita, uh, and she got teary-eyed and rushed out of the room. And it turned out that his nurse Anita had taken the weekend off to celebrate her 21st birthday, and her parents surprised her with the gift of a red MGB. She got so excited, she jumped in the car, took it for a test drive, and crashed it into a telephone pole and died instantly a few hours, during his near-death experience. So there's no way that Jack could have known at the time she had died, or certainly how she died, yet he did. And now we have several cases like this that have been corroborated. And that story to me was the most amazing of them all.
I agree. It's got so many things, isn't it? Like, how would you ever know? But he might have known it was her birthday coming up, but you would never have known she would have got a car, then a red one, then an MGB. All that is impossible.
I thought so.
Yeah, definitely. That is a high-end story.
There was
It's
another compelling experience, a very brief one, told by another friend of mine, neurosurgeon Eben Alexander.
Oh
I
yes.
don't know the name. He wrote the popular book, A Proof of Heaven, and he explained that um, he rode on the butterfly wings with a beautiful woman through a pastoral scene. And 4 months after his near-death experience, he receives a photograph of his deceased birth sister, I believe her name was Betsy, whom he never knew in life due to his being adopted. But to his astonishment, he recognized that the woman in the photograph was the same person who was with him during his NDE, riding on a butterfly wing. And according to Eben, the recognition of her in the photograph was unmistakable with her, I believe he said, her loving smile and comforting gaze and blue eyes. And to him, it was a confirmation of an existence of a realm beyond the physical world, without question.
Yeah, that reminds me exactly of, and I've said this before in here as well, but I'm going to say it again, of how I met my girlfriend. She sent me a photo of her, and as soon as I saw the photo, I knew her.
Hmm,
It's that knowing again. It's just weird that these things happen. So obviously we're connected somewhere. It's just not here.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay, so now here's a big question for you, which no doubt you will have been asked before. Consciousness, what is it?
Um,
And good luck.
Many, many. I don't pretend to have an answer. Nobody does, and anybody who does believe they have an answer to what consciousness is, I'd say their ego is showing. But there's been an endless stream of papers written by hundreds of thousands of scholars throughout the centuries and they've given lectures on it and trying to understand the nature of the meaning of consciousness and how your brain provides this sense of an individual self, the essence of who you are. You're aware of being aware. And despite all of these efforts, and even today, scholars talk about consciousness, and there's over 30 different definitions of what consciousness is because there remains to be no widely accepted theory of how the brain facilitates this self-awareness, this intention, this abstract thought. We don't have somewhere in our brain that says, well, this rainbow is awe-inspiring. We don't know where that is located. We know where if we can stimulate a certain part of the brain, I'm going to raise my hand and move a finger and elicit a memory and things of that nature. But we don't understand what's called the hard problem of consciousness. But I think, based on my experiences, Paul, in response to your question, consciousness to me is primary. Mass, matter, and energy are all derivatives of consciousness. And what David Chalmers, the noted philosopher, called the hard problem of consciousness, it will always be hard because it's not going to be found, I don't think, in the brain. Where can we find that what happened to me, my Kundalini experience, is that in the brain? My lucid dream, is that in the brain? Near-death experiences, is that in the brain? The accepted, it's a subjective experience of that inner self. It's beyond what neuroscience can explain. We don't know how the brain manufactures these kinds of these inner subjective experiences. It's like the fabric of our universe, and consciousness exists. It exists everywhere. We see evidence of it existing in even in subatomic particles, the observer effect. An electron, and you may be aware of this, an electron will behave as a wave or as a particle based on the act of observation alone. Spooky action at a distance, Einstein would call it. atomic particles change the way they behave based on whether or not a human being is attending to it. Think about that.
I know that's a mind
You know what I
blower
mean?
completely.
Yeah, yeah. We see it at the subatomic level, the microscopic level. We see it too at the human to human and the human to physical system uh, level, where this information transference with extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. We see clear evidence of it. It's very subtle, but it is a real, valid events that do exist. Healing with intent has also been proven by some to be real. And again, it may get back to biophotons, but here again, we're looking at consciousness, the that subjective essence, the intention of information exchange between human to human, human to physical systems, and we see it globally. And I made reference to it earlier when we had random number generators, meaning that 50% of the time they would become zero and 50% of the time they would become one. It's a random number generator, and they were stationed around the world, and they're collected and channeled. The information that they generate are sent to a server that was in Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University. And when 9/11 happened and millions of people worldwide were focusing on that event, the information of these random number generators, they weren't random anymore. In other words, 50-50, a one-to-one relationship. There was remarkable non-random deviation or behavior that gave rise to these random number generators. I hope I'm not being too complicated here, but
No, but
it,
what that's
it,
basically saying is that thoughts alter the world around us, right?
yeah,
Which
exactly. Yeah,
which
well,
leads you to
well,
this question then. Did consciousness create the world, or did the world create consciousness that then
Well,
impacts it? I,
looking at it from an idealist perspective, you'd say consciousness created the world. The world wouldn't exist without consciousness. They just awarded a Nobel Prize to someone who proved mathematically that if you're not observing something, then it doesn't exist. So if I'm not observing the world doesn't exist. We create it based on observation. So it's a global consciousness, this macroscopic level that you're referring to. And Paul, we also see it, this information transfer at the cosmological level. The Big Bang. The Big Bang happened, I think, 12.8 billion years ago. You and I are able to see each other only because light now emanating from the Big Bang is entering our visual system, giving rise to our ability to see.
mm,
Light energy is just coming into our point of view, and we're using it from the Big Bang 12.8 billion years ago. So information is still being shared in a sense cosmologically, if you could look at it that way. You look at consciousness in one way, along these lines, as well as the other aspects that we were talking about.
I agree. And the weirdness is as well, it's not related to this. It's related to the
Yes,
consciousness of a vision. It's weird.
exactly.
It all leads me to this question, Bob. Are we the player in the game, or are we an avatar of the real player who sits outside of the game? Have you pondered
Uh,
that?
yeah. I pondered, is this a simulation?
Mm,
Is our body an avatar? And we're just being and there's a grander consciousness, an external consciousness. Some people may call it a God consciousness. I'm not looking at it religiously. You can. Spiritually, I think I could look at it, and say maybe that there is a grander consciousness that maybe has a plan for everybody. Um, And obviously it's subjective. It's a subjective feeling, but it doesn't apply to and accepted in mainstream science. I,
Mm.
I I don't know if I'm answering that question, you know.
It's almost impossible to answer the question because you're not there to know an answer, are you? But I like the theoretical of playing it out in the mind. Do we live in a matrix? Are we a player?
Yeah,
If so, who created that player? Who created that one that created the player? You know?
yeah, there are, mathematically you can derive the simulation theory, the theory of everything. That was a book written by Tom Campbell is in our film, The Consciousness Connection. He talks about just what you're asking, that there is another external uh, higher dimension of consciousness, and we are just the players in a game. And when we die, we will interact with this alternate reality and deceased relatives, and it'll be a joyous occasion for all concerned.
Mm.
Uh, but but this is just one step in the process. And Tom Campbell, I bring him up for that reason. He was one of the people who helped Bob Monroe develop the out-of-body experience. He's had numerous out-of-body experiences with a friend of his, and they both have interacted in both their out-of-body states and have come back to compare their notes with incredible accuracy. That's another story. But the concept of virtual reality and the simulation reality is something that is real, and we're getting very theoretical, and it's okay. It's okay to do so. These theories, because these theories do exist, and it is a possibility that this is a computer-like simulation, and that people actually receive, Paul, theoretical, but David Bohm, the noted physicist, he came up with the explicate and implicate order that you may be familiar with.
Doesn't ring a bell, actually.
The explicate order um, has to do with causality and locality, and the physical laws of science, Newtonian physics, of course, that serve us very well, obviously, right? We land on the moon, we can study the stars. We need Newtonian physics. It makes our lives a bit more tolerable, makes it more difficult in some ways too,
Mm.
but obviously, we evolve with time technologically, not necessarily spiritually, at least not in the Western society. But um, um, your question again was what?
It's about are we in the matrix? And I know there's a code. I believe there was research done that there was a code unraveled in the universe that we could see mathematical code in the very fabric of the universe. Does
Well,
that mean we are in a matrix?
uh, it supports the idea that consciousness is fundamental. Physical reality is a derivative of it. That's bottom line. And whether or not we're in a simulation or not, I think that consciousness still, it is proving that physical reality is derives from it, and our existence alone may prove just that. The answer occurs only upon death, or upon
Yeah,
when
yeah.
people report to have near-death experiences and actually, pierce the veil and perceive this alternate reality as they claim. And they're sitting in front of their large desks on Fifth Avenue in New York City or London, England, and they still, based on the fact that they've had a near-death experience, or even if they've had a psychoactive drug like ayahuasca and saw non-human entities and elves or gnomes and other creatures that are benign and spiritual in terms of giving of their messages to them, they still, in other words, believe it occurred. That's my point. It doesn't matter who or what we are, how much money, power we have. We have these kinds of experiences and we believe them to be true. That's how real that it is, as real as the back of their hand, and they're unforgettable. And it moves people to more humane, professions, and to be more accepting of one another overall.
Is it a weird one, right? Again, to extrapolate and theorize a bit further, you know that the world is what we believe. The world is affected by the consciousness, so it's what we create, what we see, what we want, all those sort of things. Yeah, we're creating this. Is it via by the very nature of us theorizing how it works, we are changing the nature of everything because we're now thinking, oh, we're in a matrix. Do we change the nature of everything to become a matrix by thinking about it?
Uh, well, that gets into the science of the imagination. What is real? There, there's a line of thought that says what you imagine is real. What you imagine can get you sick, can make you happy. So it's real. And can you use that to your advantage? And can you be aware of when it is a disadvantage, in other words, and how to manipulate what you not necessarily your dream states, but that's why I'm a proponent for meditation because you get into your insights a little bit more closely. It's not masked by normal daily living and the sick news that you hear 24/7. I can't watch the news
No, turn it off.
anymore.
Yeah.
I'm serious. It is that negative, and it brings in viewers. Maybe it's purposely negative. There's nothing positive. So, so uh, you take time to relax, to tune out, to imagine, uh, and to imagine everything, your inner self, your emotions, your experiences, the recent past will come across, but come back to your mantra, that one syllable that you keep repeating, or music that you're listening to. Keep coming back to it as your mind wanders. Keep coming back to it as your mind explores different things of the recent and long past and your inner emotions and feelings and future actions. And it could be meaningful. You could gain insight, your imagination, what you think in of your inner self during periods of quietness when the society and life doesn't override our thinking and our daily 9 to 5 activity and writing bills and dealing with traumas, etc., as well as the blessings of life, certainly. But we all have traumas that we deal with and annoyances that are limiting in many ways. But all I can say is meditate as often as possible and tune in and turn out.
There is literally value in positive thinking. It's almost that simple, isn't it?
Yes, yes, that's a good way to put it.
Mm.
Yes, karma, karma.
Karma, yeah, there's another one. What state do you think science is at now? I mean, how close are we to actually scientifically measure and test consciousness, do you think? Is there any steps along the way that you're aware of?
There's nothing specific in science that looks at consciousness other than looking at parts of the brain. It's called production theory, is the latest that is going on in neuroscience, how the brain can possibly produce consciousness. And by stimulating certain areas of the frontal lobes, for instance, you have higher order processing of cognitive function, decision making, intention, abstract thought, but there is still no evidence yet uh, to prove that it produces production theory. It produces consciousness, my ability to communicate and feel our conversation, the totality and essence of what we're experiencing one-on-one between ourselves and what your audience is experiencing as they're listening to us, tuning in or tuning out, or turning on
Let's say tuning in,
what we're
please.
saying.
Yeah.
There's nothing there's nothing in your brain that spells that, that says that. You know what I mean? That's the hard problem, the so-called hard problem of consciousness. Um, where is it? Neurophysiologically, electrophysiologically. We don't see evidence of it. Maybe one day we will, Paul. I can't be certain, but we're far from it.
Far,
And
yeah.
that's why, yeah, and that's why we say when people claim to have alternate realms of reality through mediumship or near death and other extraordinary events along the lines we're talking about, sense of duality, are they really experiencing? Are they really experiencing this, or is it an illusion? And what is the reality of it? And how can we prove it? Yeah, how do we prove it? And to right now we can't. But that's why we need to take a subjective experience into much greater consideration, Paul. And you're hitting it on the head. We have to tie and integrate the subjective essence of the experience, imagination, with physical laws and try to integrate both of them into a coherent whole. And then you have a new scientific paradigm. And unfortunately, a paradigm, the Darwinian theory of evolution, the Copernican revolution, even general relativity, quantum mechanics. We're hitting on it, skimming the surfaces of general relativity and quantum mechanics and some of the things that we've talked about. But but they occur one funeral at a time.
Yes. Yes. So
You
when
know,
somebody gets out the way, yeah, more can come through.
it's slow progress, but yeah, in the future, we'll be able to integrate the subjective and the physical. We'll have a coherent, uniform opinion of consciousness and what it is and how to measure it. Because we can't now, other than what we're saying, there, it could be the synchronistic. I mean, the closest that we have, Paul, is this synchronicity of electrophysiological activity of the brain that occurs among people. You could have meditators, for instance, in a group versus a group of people who are loosely interacting, not meditating, bonding empathically together. And this is a study that has been done on meditators and non-meditators. And electrophysiologically, when you put electrodes on their head, their EEG activity, brainwave activity, becomes much, much similar where you can't even dissociate among them, the meditators. But the non-meditators, those individuals had EEG activity that was highly dissimilar, proving, proving that maybe that when we do share a common activity and we have this kind of bonding and connectivity, it's like a one consciousness, a unification. And that's what people feel during these awakenings. So unification is one of the highest principles in theory of an awakening. Unification with life.
I have a question on that actually. So this unification idea is, I like it. So let's say 20 people do meditation, right? And through EEGs we could see the pattern of the brain waves, yeah? And let's just call it pattern A. If we run that experiment again with 20 different people, would they create the same pattern as A, or would it be a unique pattern to that group of people? I.e., could we prove that they're tuning into the source consciousness field and that is the vibration of that source consciousness, or are they separate pocket universes?
That's a study in and of itself.
Mm.
If you had in other words, if you had a group of people that are focusing on one thing versus another group of people who are not, is that what your question is saying?
I'm just saying, you take 20 meditators, are they meditating to become this consciousness that is the source consciousness? And by running it with another group of 20 and then another group of 20, do they
Yeah.
sort of like get the same pattern? Or are they different patterns because they're forming local consciousness fields rather than
I
super?
wish I had the answer to that, Paul. That's an
Hmm.
exceptional question. I don't I can't pretend to answer it because I don't have an answer. But it's an excellent question.
Right, so anyone with money out there, please go and do that experiment. We need to know the answer to that. That could prove lots of things. Um, let's go a bit more theoretical as well. You mentioned the word purpose earlier.
The
If
word
you've
what?
pondered this again, you the word purpose.
Purpose?
Yeah. So what do we think the purpose of all this is? Assuming, right, that there is a consciousness field and it's creating this, for what reason?
Spiritual evolution.
Okay.
That's the first thing that comes to my gut and mind. And we need to listen more to our gut, our subconscious, which precedes our conscious awareness of a future action. Listen more to your gut, but it's spiritual evolution. And I could say that only from a personal standpoint. I have evolved spiritually. I would not be speaking to you about consciousness, spirituality, and everything I talked about without being more of a spiritual individual, following my extraordinary human experiences after my retirement. Yeah, and I think that's the purpose to life. I don't know what percent of people do evolve in that direction versus those that don't, and maybe, play golf, watch the news, belch, and go to bed,
You've
you
always got
know,
a belch, have you, before bed?
without any contemplation of anything we're talking about. And I think that would apply, and I'm being very general, but that would apply materialistically to the majority of society. What did the stock market do? I'm still I still have a mindset in the physical materialistic nature of life. We have to live.
Yeah.
We have to live, but we have to be selective. We have to try to divorce ourselves from the physicalities of life and the pressures of life as much as possible. Spiritual evolution helps us do that. Expanded consciousness helps us do that. And the best way I know of getting there is through meditative practice. Yoga can be very helpful for people, or Tai Chi. There are many other approaches that are used that are mindful based. MBR, uh, I forget what MBR stands for. Electro EDR, electrodermal response recording. EDR is being used by people for expanded consciousness. There are different approaches, but the point is for one to become a truth seeker. If one is a truth seeker, what is the purpose of life? Is there life after death? The essential questions of life, trying to become more spiritual, whether it's religious based or not, faith based or not. For one to be more spiritual, less materialistic is I think a primary goal, the main goal of life. Good question.
I always think I know, and I'm with you by the way. I think exactly the same as you, and a lot of other people I've spoken to come out with the same answer. So I'm headed in that direction. But it does make me ponder this question again. If we're a consciousness field, if we are this thing, why come down to evolve? In theory, we could create ourselves already involved, unless it's just for the experience.
Good question. I wish I had the answer. Do, does it help us? Yes. In doing so, does it help us evolve spiritually? You know, For the next life, it gets into past life recall. Um, Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia, is a leading authority in that area. 1,700 proven cases suggesting to him that reincarnation is highly suggested. The evidence, in other words, of his research has proven to him that it highly suggests the possibility of reincarnation. Is that the purpose of assuming a physical body to evolve spiritually? I can only say that maybe it is. I don't know for sure. And do we take it with us so that we're more enlightened as a result from early on in life as possible in the next life? Is it transmittable, across lives or
Yeah.
across dimensions? Obviously highly theoretic in nature when we talk about it. We can't prove it one bit. But I still enjoy talking about it nevertheless. So
Oh, me too. Reincarnation's fascinating, but it makes you think how many past lives must we have had, assuming, let's just say, there's a break of 50 years between lives. Going back eons, millennia, we'd have had hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. And I'm not perfect by any sense of the imagination. But what was I before this? Was I an asshole? Was I a murderer? I must have started evil if I've been on a path towards spiritual enlightenment.
it's hard to say.
Yeah, impossible. But
It's impossible to say, but I would encourage people to go to hypnotists who do past life regressions using the theory, quantum theory, and I can't quantum hologram theory of consciousness. People who practice that kind of um, hypnosis, and it's not accepted in a court of law, at least in the United States, evidence, in other words, that is revealed via hypnosis. But nevertheless, using that method, quantum therapy, uh, people believe that they have experienced past lives with great accuracy, as if they're looking at the back of their hand. And it does reveal to them, that they have evolved spiritually. And it does relieve a lot of their unknown fears and anxieties that are based on fearful and anxious events that occurred in the past. What's called epigenetic inheritance, transgenetic epigenetic inheritance, whereby emotions and behaviors, are passed on. Just like our eye color, our hair color, and our physical features are obviously genetically determined by our parents, of course.
yeah,
We're
the
black or white
genetic
or
memory
Indian
literally is that, isn't
because
it?
of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe there is a memory that is genetically based, and the traumas and the spiritual awakenings of the past are also transmitted to prior lives, and we incorporate that, and it does us justice or just the opposite as a result. So this and there have been a few studies that have been done on Holocaust survivors, parents of children born, in other words, to survivors of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, and other Holocausts that racially motivated in other parts of the world over time, not just the Jews and the Holocaust, but these studies have shown that the children tend to be more anxious. Now it's hard to control for the anxiety level of the parents, which alone could transmit that subjective sensation of anxiety. But they thought it was an evidence of the anxious experience that the parents endured during their childhood, which was transmitted on through their genes to their subsequent children.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It obviously has to interact with nature versus nurture sort of thing, doesn't it? As to is it the parents nowadays being seen to be anxious in their life, and therefore the kid follows that behavior. That's the nurture rather than the nature where it would be that epigenetic memory coming through.
That's
It's an
right.
interesting one. A horrible question I'm going to ask you now, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. So, are you looking forward to your own death so that you can find the answers?
I fear it.
Oh, okay.
It's a very good question. I wrote the book, Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence. And before the book, I was 50-50. Do we live after this life? And after I wrote the book, I was became more like 70-30, 80-20 that we do. And primarily based on mediumship evidence and near-death experience evidence. I encourage people to read more about that. And it's covered in my film, The Consciousness Connection, which can be viewed consciousness.media and also on Amazon Video, if I may put in a plug for that, and my
Hell
book,
yeah.
This Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences, which was also just released, the book, same name of the movie. Um, I fear death. I shouldn't say I fear death, excuse me. I fear suffering. I fear cancer,
Yeah,
is
that
what I
makes
fear.
sense.
And I'm now 71. So I'm approaching, I'll be 72 soon, and I'm approaching 80. It scares the living shit out of me. I started writing a book, Paul. I started
Yeah.
writing a book on aging, and I stopped. Why? Because I started writing a chapter called Why Live Past 80? The incidence statistics of heart disease and cancer and a whole host of other physiological problems rise so dramatically at age 80 and beyond that it's depressing. You spend your whole life in a doctor's office. And who wants to live like that?
Mm.
Who wants to live on chemo and etc. And
So you don't necessarily feel
unfortunately,
the death itself; it's just the suffering
yeah,
prior to the death.
I'm I'm I've seen enough evidence from near-death experience research that almost proves to me that there's a life after death. I can't be 100% sure. I can't be. And that's the scientific method in me. That's the
Mm.
science in me. I can't be 100% sure, but I can be pretty close. And I am pretty close to believing that there is life after life.
Yeah, and I'm the same as you, by the way. I don't want to suffer. Me and Tiff have talked it all the time, and we just want to die both together in bed one night, and that's it, and never know of it. You know.
Pass an, pass an embolism and stroke out and don't wake up the next morning. That's right. That,
Exactly, and if Nibs is still alive, our dog, he has to go at the same time via the same method. But although he's not in our bed, all right, that's not happening.
that's right.
I want to retouch back on the UFO side of things that and you alluded to your well, not alluded, you went through your experience earlier. Looking back on that experience of that orange ball, what do you think it was?
I don't know. I have absolutely no idea why it was so symmetrical and why one emerged from the other. Um, and it motivated me to write that book. It could have been a sign. I lean in that direction. And because people have reported paranormal events in that area, it's a hot spot for paranormal events like Skinwalker Ranch, which I'm sure you've heard about in
Hmm.
England. It's on TV, where paranormal activity is very common. Paranormal activity is also very common where I was located in Sedona, Arizona. And I was on the ranch that is like Skinwalker. and I can't remember the name of the ranch. It's not necessary right now.
It's okay.
Um, but where I had that experience. Um, and that led me, the book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe, the first book I wrote, that led me to become a member of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation for Extraterrestrial Experiences. I started researching and publishing articles on people's experience with interacting with non-human intelligence and UAPs. We did a large-scale study on 3,200 people,
Mm.
over 3,200 people on the topic, suggesting that people were having an out-of-body experience and interacting with these individuals, and that 80% of them regarded it as a positive experience. So one thing led to another. And then I had my lucid dream event. And that led to that book, Life After Death, Analysis of the Evidence. And then I had the Kundalini, et cetera, et cetera. So, so it's a paradigm shift within, uh, let alone the fact that we need a paradigm shift in society overall.
So do you think it was a universe or whatever put it down a marker for you just to say, right, head this way now?
Yeah, it's almost like things are planned out. And right now I'm at a point where I am doing another film that's based on near-death experiences exclusively. This is going to be the second film of the Conscious Connection uh, series. We're producing a docu-series on consciousness.media. And that docu-series that's shown by
Oh,
TV
Gaia TV.
production. Gaia TV is the producer. Well, they're sponsoring the pre and post production of the documentary. You can sign up for a 7-day free trial, actually, through Gaia if you don't like the other documentaries on Gaia. They have a lot of good documentaries. I would recommend it highly. There are some that are, so-so, and how ours fits in is up to the viewer's discretion, of course. But ours is a history of consciousness studies and also extrasensory perception and out of body experiences and the stigma that's associated with a lot of the um, evidence that we see that people report when they do interact with non-human intelligent creatures and consciousness. These concepts are developed in this documentary. And we'd like to think we did an excellent job providing an entertaining, educational, and thought-provoking film in this area. And we believe we did. Well, obviously, we're very biased, but the next film is going to again focus exclusively on the subjective experiences that people are having when they have near-death experiences.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to watching the consciousness one and that when it comes out. Um, what do you think the true nature of aliens, UFOs, UAPs, all this stuff is? Is it another part of the paranormal or normal phenomenon that is just interacting with us to make us go in a certain direction, or are they real physical beings like you and I, just from a different location?
Uh, we're probably looking at multiple so-called paranormal events. We have structured craft, and we also have orbs, and we also have these 4-foot creatures with large heads and wide black eyes, you know, entering people's walls at night and interacting them so they report. So people report. Again, but we're not just talking one or two people. Uh, are these events real? Are these hallucinations, illusions, or are these events real? What does it represent? I don't know. Is it a life form that existed on this planet before we did, and we're the new kids on the block? Is it our future? cells and evolutionary biologists, for instance, believe that we will grow shorter in stature, grow our heads larger, become bald in nature, and as a result, look frail the way that these so-called grays do. And is it our future that's traversing time, going back in time, and somehow taking our genetic material, creating babies from it to somehow allow them to continue on with their species? That's another claim that's being
It's a
made
good claim
by
that one. I like that one a
that
lot.
claim is made by a evolutionary biologist, Michael Masters.
Mm.
That's not coming from me. I'm not taking credit for that. So we have the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, an already existing species that exists. We have a futuristic one as well. We have the interdimensional one, another, the multiverse theory, the several uni dimensions, different time and places that coexist with our own, that do that somehow can allow people from one dimension to infiltrate another dimension. If they're technologically advanced, they can actually do that. Some people believe that the appearance, the phenomenology of the UAPs, their ability to wink out, their ability to go at 1,000 Gs without creating a sonic boom, they believe that all that is paranormal. That's quantum mechanics. That's spooky action at a distance. People couldn't survive that in Newtonian physics. So it has to be interdimensional. People are somehow accessing our dimension from another. That's why they wink out and wink in the way they do. So that's another theory, the hologram related theory of the interdimensional hypothesis associated with UAPs. So there's many theories. One even that is that separate civilizations exist underwater. We know less about the water than we do about space, and unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, is another classification that is noted by the U.S. Navy and other naval systems around the world of countries where these UFOs are seen to exit and enter water frequently, perplexing radar operators and people on naval vessels who are experiencing this, and suggesting that there are other life forms underwater, believe it or not. So that's another theory.
If you had to
Uh,
take all these theories, though, Bob, and then link it up with the research you did on the abductees and experiencers and stuff, where's it leaning to for you? Is it still multiple scenarios overlapping, or do you have a preference of it's likely to be this?
I think people are receiving interactions with non-human entities, um, very possibly through downloads, non-locality from another universe using quantum technology. That we do have an external consciousness, an expanded consciousness that is somehow interacting with our minds, with some people's minds, providing spiritual messages. Because people who come back from near-death experiences, from UAP experiences, from interactions with non-human intelligences, the vast majority of them come back with spiritual messages, messages of oneness, of unity, of spiritual evolution, and also of science and technology for some reason. People believe to say it wasn't my idea. This invention of electricity, this invention of light wasn't my idea. This invention of general relativity wasn't my idea. These individuals, scientists, have said just that. It wasn't their idea. It came to them in a dream. These discoveries came about not from their own mind to them, but elsewhere. Where did it come from? That's the question. What does that mean? I mean, they're smart, no doubt. It could be keen insight, but they still believe that that something is occurring that's beyond their abilities, that can't be explained, rationally. So, what it means, I think people are interacting with a another reality. I think there is an alternate reality, and people are coming to terms with its existence, its fundamental reality. There is a subjective and a spiritual dimension to life, and I believe people are uh, validating that through their own experiences in different ways, through awakenings, through interactions, and I think that they are experiencing so-called paranormal events through extraordinary experiences of varying types that we're talking about, but are real, are normal. What we call paranormal will eventually be considered normal
Normal. Yep.
in
Yep.
the future.
I agree. I agree. Now, I want to quickly touch on how you've changed before we enter the Koit zone, and then we'll wrap up. Now, we've covered most of this ground already today, but I do want to ask again. As your younger self, your scientist, would he believe the position you're in now? Would he think, oh, crikey, how did I end up there? Or would he think that's a natural progression of himself? That's the first part of the question.
This isn't a natural progression. If I didn't have these experiences,
Yeah.
I don't know what I would be doing. I honestly don't know. I think I might try to learn golf because a lot of people, of course, in retirement have a lot of time on their hands and they golf. It's a very difficult sport to master, of course, and learning it at an older age is nearly impossible. But I try to pick something up like that. Probably read a lot more, watch TV a lot more, and act and behave much more materialistic than I now do. I walk vigorously, at least 10,000 steps a day. I was sidelined for 2 years with a painful back and had surgery about 4 months ago. So I have put up with a lot of physical ailments that were all arthritic in nature. Otherwise, I'm extremely healthy and hopefully mentally intact as well at age 71. But nevertheless, we shouldn't take life for granted. It goes by quickly, Paul. It really does.
Well, I know. Yes.
And you become more aware of just that obvious notion. The older we get, time seems to go by more quickly.
But you would never have thought of yourself in this position now, then, would you, as a
Uh,
younger man?
no, not in the least.
Mm.
I never considered spirituality or consciousness concepts in general, and I'm drawn to that. However, Paul, I was a closet ufologist. You grow up in the 60s with astronauts taking off every 3 months to orbit the Earth and eventually land on the moon. It was hard not to become a closet ufologist and be turned on. A lot of people weren't for some reason, but be turned on by the fact that we're going to walk on the moon. It's one of the greatest memories of my life, experiencing just watching that outcome that
Mm.
we strove so long to achieve. Um, but this path that I'm on now, writing four books and doing the movie, this is something that I never would have done unless I didn't have each one of these experiences, which led to the books and the film.
Which leads me to the last question before the Koit zone, which is, do you feel like your life was fated or designed?
It's designed, Paul.
Yeah, I know you said that. Yeah.
It's designed. You know, and I don't bring it up to my wife anymore. Uh,
Does it scare her? Is that why?
yes, exactly.
Mm.
It's scary to her, and why it evokes that, I'm not sure. But there's a grand scheme, and I've seen people too, others who also have weird experiences. Some for mostly for the good, some not so for the good, where they dwell on it and they become um, over interested, where they become consumed with the paranormal events that are happening in their life, where they're focused almost exclusively on that
Mm.
and very little else. Some of them become paranoid, overly anxious about these events that happen to them. They're not always pleasant. People going ghost hunting may regret it. Not always good things occur when you start playing with Ouija boards, and I encourage people not to do these kinds of things, and black magic and those kinds of arts, shall we say.
I agree. I would never do that. Don't open doors that I don't think I'd be able to close. Sod that. You know what I mean?
But the main message, I wouldn't be doing this. It's fate. There's destiny. There's planned. It's all planned for us. And we tried best to make the proper decisions, because people can easily make one careless mistake and have a major change in life and regret it for as long as they live. It can be relatively minor in nature, but we all make errors in inductive reasoning. We do it shopping every day, buying the wrong products. How many times do we exchange items, let alone marrying people we shouldn't, or having or
Yeah.
having experiences we shouldn't? We have to be very careful and very selective
We do.
of,
I mean,
of
I don't want to get home and then realize I've bought an unsmoked gammon ham as opposed to a smoked one. I mean, you could relate that to marrying the wrong woman. I don't know, but right, Bob. It is now time to quickly enter the Koit zone. Koit zone. So, random questions, Bob. Let's see how you fare in this zone. What is the best flavor?
ice cream,
Yeah, but that's just the thing. What is the best flavor?
pistachio.
Oh, okay, pistachio. I've never had that, so I can't tell you what it tastes like. But well played, Tiff. Will she'll know. What is the most intense physical pain you remember?
Shoulder replacement.
Oh wow.
One night, wake up during the middle of the night, right after my shoulder was replaced, and it felt like a knife being stuck in, and I'm counting the seconds until I can get more fentanyl in my veins. And the nurse says, 2 hours, Bob, 2 hours, you gotta wait. And you're counting the seconds down, until you can get some relief.
Well, do you have to have like a new ball joint or something? A new
Yeah.
socket or something? Oh wow. Yeah, not good. Not good. Um, when was the last time you fell off a bicycle?
Oh, must have been 10, 11 years old.
Cool. I was expecting that, but you never know. Some people do fall
Oh
off them
no,
later in
no,
life.
no, no. I take it back. I was something
Ah,
like I take it back.
is that how you damaged your shoulder?
I was 27, 28, 29, with my wife. I was riding my bike. I hit a crack. The handlebars turned violently. I flipped over the front of the
Oh,
bike, and I
Christ.
broke my elbow. So that's the last time I rode a bike.
Well, yeah, never again.
And
Keep
that's the
buttering
last
things up.
time I fell
Yeah.
off a bike.
Do you have a favorite musician or band?
I like Steely Dan, and I like Steely Dan's music, and I forget his name. Doesn't come to mind. Steely Dan, I'd say, is number one.
And had you seen them live?
Yes, I
Good.
have.
I like that. That's it. You've
Yeah,
got to
yeah.
at least see one band that you like or musician in your lifetime live. It has to be done. Well played. What is the grossest thing you've eaten?
Uh, I don't remember. Uh, Probably gefilte fish, white fish with horseradish. I'm Jewish by nature, and we it's served during a Passover Seder. It's the the guts of the fish
Oh
just
no.
just
Yeah.
put together, or organ meat just scrambled up, and you have a ball,
Oh, that
and,
sounds so
and
lovely.
you have a ball of it, and that's why you mix it with horseradish, which is very spicy, of course. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but that was pretty gross to me.
I would say a ball of guts. That's not nice. Proper grim. Um, what would you say is the one item you own that you keep losing the most?
Oh, my phone, without question.
I like that. It always happens to Tiff as well, that one. Is there a movie that you've watched so many times that you could recite the script?
Saving Private Ryan and
Ah,
Shawshank Redemption. Those two, one of those two. I don't know which one to choose. Maybe Saving Private Ryan.
both
Uh,
are high-end films.
yeah,
They're very
indeed.
good films. Well played. You've chosen well. Um, do you have any vices, or at the very least things that call to you, like chocolate?
Do I have any vices? Occasionally, I'll vape. I'll be very honest with you. Occasionally. I used to be a former smoker in my teens, stopped when I was about 30, stopped for about 30, 35 years. When I retired, I started smoking cigars a little bit every now and then, and occasionally I'll vape every now and then
Were you one
with
of
a
those
my
guys
wife.
that had cigar with a whiskey, like, and then you'd have a special jacket?
No, I hate alcohol. I never drink any form of alcohol.
It's gross, isn't it? I don't like it myself. It's horrible stuff. Right, when you die, unless you plan on living as you forever, um, do you have any thoughts on how you'd like to be remembered or how you'd like to be taken care of body wise? And I'll give you an example. I always think when I want to die, I want to be burnt on a pyre like Darth Vader was at the end of Return of the Jedi. So, any thoughts?
I never thought of it. I never thought of it other than I plan on being cremated. And I'd like to be thought of someone who tried his best to educate and inform, humanity that that is reality is far more complex than we can ever imagine,
You
and to
can't
have
fit
an
all that
open
on a
mind.
tombstone, Bob. That's a lot of text. Unless you have a huge tombstone. Um, Last question in the Koit zone. In your back garden, you find a small trinket box, and inside that is an amulet, which, once put on, allows you to travel in time and space to a place of your choosing. But it's a one-way trip, so beware. Are you putting it on? And if so, where are you going and when?
Yeah, I'm putting it on going home. I'm putting it on to I'm putting on something that's like a yin yang symbol white and black
Okay.
with that yin yang, and it's taking me home to a place where there's nothing but compassion and love. And I believe there is a place where there is nothing but compassion and overpowering love. Like the love I'm talking about is described to me. A woman who had a near-death experience once described love saying this. It's like the love I felt, Bob, she says, is like looking in the eyes of your first newborn's eyes for the first time, magnified 10 million times. That's the love I felt during my near-death experience, she said to me. And I've heard that many times, Paul. I've heard it enough
Mm.
to the point where I'm a scientist for 3 decades, almost four, if you consider my student days of being a scientist. But the point is, I'm still torn. However, leaning so strongly to the fact that uh, This is yin yang, and I'm going home to a much more beautiful place.
You know, you said it earlier anyway that you've almost felt that, haven't you? Because you said you had that scenario where you felt that bliss. Is it the
Mhm.
same thing as what that woman felt, or is it?
Oh yes, a good point. Yes, indeed.
So you're going
I
home for more
I
of that?
can't explain it more. You have to experience it.
Mm.
We you don't everybody experiences happiness and sadness and anger kind of differently. But we all nevertheless share a common mind. So we have many similarities, but we also have unique differences, which makes life quite unique.
And interesting, very much so. Okay, that's the end of the Koit zone, which leaves us two final questions. First of which, what else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
Uh, uh, in my downtime, I walk with my wife, at least 10,000 steps a day. That's my main hobby.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
love that.
I wish I had more. I play chess as well against a computer and other people worldwide on my phone. So that's what I do in my downtime, as well as meditate. And I screw around a little bit as well, but I don't party. I don't do anything too crazy, but maybe I should.
Just off vaping all the time when you get a chance. I know that. I jest, of course. Right, and the last question I always ask, but I think you've already told me the answer to this one anyway, which is, what are you currently working on? No, it's your documentary, isn't it? Your new one.
Yeah, I'm working on a trailer part for near-death experiences. Then we're gonna give a pitch to a Gaia Productions about what we think would be make sense in terms of our next film in our docuseries, The Consciousness Connection on consciousness.media or Amazon Video.
Exactly. Thank you ever so much, Bob. Anyone watching this, go and check out the links in the description to Bob's sites, and obviously you can see that documentary regarding the consciousness experiment. Connection. So go and take care of that. Take care of business. Go and look at Bob up. Bob, thank you ever so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. Great stories, etc. Thank you ever so much.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you, and thank you for your questions. I found them very insightful and helpful.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much, and goodbye, everyone. I will see you on the next one. Goodbye. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.